If you look at the image behind me, you might just about notice that it is in the shape of a flower. And it is, with the number 1915 emblazoned on that flower. Now, this flower is the forget-me-not. And it's a flower that was chosen as the symbol of commemoration of the centennial of the Armenian genocide in 2015, and it has been used ever since for the 101st, 102nd, 103rd, 4th, 5th, until this year, the 106th anniversary of the Armenian genocide. Now, I apologize if the image is not very clear, but that's because my computer does not have the appropriate app to make it any clearer. However, I will share an image of that flower with you when I post this episode on YouTube. But when you look at that flower later on, try to distinguish the various components. For instance, the black color symbolizes the horrors and the memory of the genocide. The yellow part pictures the light in the form of 12 pillars forming a circle, which represents the memorial of Tsitsernagaberd, which is the Armenian genocide memorial in Yerevan, the capital of Armenia. The purple symbolizes the recognition and condemnation of the genocide. And the 5 petals of the flower are the 5 continents where Armenian immigrants found shelter as they fled the genocide during the period 1915-1923 and eventually created communities that became known as the Armenian diaspora. Now you might well ask, fine, you've got an image that you're using, which is a forget-me-not, and you have tried to explain the components of this flower and its association with the Armenian genocide. But why today? Well, simply because yesterday, 24th April 2021, was the day when President Joe Biden made a statement in which, for the first time, a sitting US president officially described the chapter of Armenian suffering during World War I as genocide. Now, if we go back in history a bit, in American history, I recall that a number of years ago, when Ronald Reagan was a president, he also mentioned the G word, the Armenian genocide. But then he was pressured to retract it. Later on, President Obama used the technical term for the genocide, Meds Yerern, the big catastrophe, as a very clever and political ploy to avoid using the word genocide. But in 2021, after a lot of anticipation and expectation, with the US Congress actually endorsing the idea of the genocide, President Joe Biden fulfilled an election promise that was based on respect of human rights and said that this was indeed a genocide. So welcome to this new and rather autonomous episode of YouTube. It is Armenian. I suppose it could belong to the family of YouTube episodes on Nagorno-Karabakh, but it has a distinctive feature to it because it focuses during those few minutes on the issue of the genocide and recognition of this genocide, which some sociologists and scholars consider as the first genocide of the 20th century. Now, I use there a word that is key, that is central to the thinking of many people, those who support the genocide and call for its recognition, and those who do not support it, namely Turkey and its allies, the detractors, who would not wish the world to delve into the genocide and who constantly say that this was not a genocide. In other words, it was not perpetrated according to the benchmarks that you can easily find in the 1948 Convention of the United Nations on Genocide. So, where do we stand today? Well, to be honest with you, even all Armenians aren't in agreement as to how to proceed with this issue of the Armenian genocide. A question that is a very valid and plausible one is, okay, after years and years of lobbying, an American president, a conscientious president who is very keen to have human rights at the forefront of his mandate, recognize the genocide. So the question would be, what next? Okay, he's done it. So what now? What has changed for Armenians, for Turks, and for the world community today? And in this, there are two schools of thought as far as Armenians go. As an Armenian, I want to focus for a few minutes on that rather than broaden the ambit of this episode. The majority Armenian perception or thought is that, yes, by all means, there should be a recognition of the genocide. And the 27 or 28, 29, I think it mounts up to 30 countries that have recognized the genocide have basically been applauded and praised by scholars, by sociologists, by lawyers, and also, of course, by Armenians for having braved the storm and recognized the genocide, either via executive statements or through parliament. Key amongst those, of course, are Russia, Germany, and France. Now we can add the United States as well. But alas, we cannot add the United Kingdom or Israel. That is the majority school of thought within Armenian communities. But there is another school of thought which says, okay, so why a recognition? I mean, what's the point of literally begging leaders, political leaders across the world to utter the G word? What is it going to make? How is it going to sate the thirst of Armenians for justice, for recognition? Well, my attitude to that has been a little bit ambivalent, both in my write-ups and my comments on the subject, as well as during the time when I basically led the campaign for recognition of the Armenian genocide in the United Kingdom. Why? Well, let me explain. It's because I believe that recognition is important, still is important. And those people who say, no, it's not important, it's not really, doesn't lead to anything, it's not conclusive, what's the point of all this angst for the sake of a word that is not going to change the state of affairs across the world? And then there are those who say, no, it should happen. Now, I wrote a piece for Embrace the Middle East, which is the successor of Bible Lands, in which I basically connected the Armenian genocide issue with the recent war in Nagorno-Karabakh between Armenians and Azerbaijanis. And I highlighted or focused on what I called the PTSD factor, the post-traumatic stress disorder that resulted from the war in the South Caucasus a few months ago. You can read that piece. I will put a link to it in the description box as well. But why? And this, I think, goes to the heart of the debate on recognition in one sense. I would agree with those who say, so what? So what next? What next means we have to talk about justice. And what is justice? It also includes elements of restoration and elements of accountability. So in a sense, that recognition on its own is just a label. It's just some mascara, cosmetic, if it does not followed by more substantive steps that would lead to reconciliation. And when I talk about that, I don't necessarily go for maximalist positions. Oh, it means that historical lands should go back to Armenians. Oh, it means that Turkey, as a successor of the predecessor Ottoman regime, should pay compensation. I would say even simpler things, like opening the border between Armenia and Turkey. So there should be a recognition should lead to something. But recognition is also a psychological issue. And this is where it goes to the PTSD factor I just mentioned. Armenians, if you read any article or any book on the suffering of the Armenians as well as the Syriacs and the Pontic Greeks during World War I, you will know that no matter where you stand on politics, where you stand on global analyses, you cannot but be affected by the human suffering, the deaths, the deportations, the fragmentation of a robust, active community within Turkey that was pretty much decimated. Because otherwise, a very simple question. All those Armenians who were living in Ottoman Turkey and Anatolia, what happened to them after those key or crucial years between 1915 and 1923? Did they all ascend into heaven? Did they evaporate? Did they disappear? Or were they basically Star Trek-like taken off to another planet? They are not there. The numbers dwindled. Why? Because the majority of them were killed, either in the country where they were living or in the desert, the Syrian desert, or when they fled those atrocities. So in a sense, recognition in itself implies responsibilities. But it also does the psychological bit, whereas the fear, the anxiety our Armenians have about what could happen to them, that cannot be addressed if there isn't an admission by the world community, but principally by Turkey itself today, that something seriously wrong happened during World War I. This acknowledgement, this recognition, to use the word again and again, is what would address the fears and anxieties of many an Armenian across the world, and certainly in the diaspora. After all, for those who say, what recognition? I mean, the whole world knows that there was a genocide. The whole world knows what happens to those Armenians and other communities. So why all this fuss? Well, the same could be said about Palestinians today. Why all the fuss of going to the International Criminal Court if they were to sit back and say, well, the whole world knows that our lands are being stolen, settlements are being built on them, our homes are being destroyed, our rights are being violated. So fine, they know about it. There's no point in their being recognized. But that recognition fulfills a psychological need in most people, and it also ushers in, hopefully, measures taken by all parties that would lead to an eventual reconciliation. And step by step, that reconciliation, which could be cool, cold, look at the peace treaty between Israel and Jordan, between Israel and Egypt, that could eventually lead to a healing of wounds that would eventually, inevitably, in my opinion at least, also address the PTSD factor that is so prevalent in Armenian psyches and Armenian genes, and incidentally also in Turkish genes for those who know about it. Because one of the things I've noticed most of all is the ignorance of many, many people across the world, including in Turkey, to this chapter in their own history. That, to me, is what recognition did yesterday. It added another building block toward what I hope will not be further antagonism and further polarization and silly invectives coming out of Ankara or elsewhere. No, that it actually helps the healing process, a process that we all need in this world. So this is basically what I wanted to say today. I sincerely hope that Joe Biden's recognition of the Armenian genocide yesterday will encourage people, Armenians, Turks, and the world community to redouble their efforts to try and address this issue, but address it seriously, address it objectively, address it with integrity, with the purpose of bringing justice and closure to a chapter that has been both vile and violent. There are enough genocides in the world today. We've had the Armenian genocide. I said some suggest it's the first of the 20th century, but look at what has happened afterwards. From the Jewish Holocaust to Timor, to the recent ones in China and in Myanmar, formerly Burma. Humanity has to acknowledge its mistakes, not only in order not to repeat them, but first and foremost, to learn from them and to understand that there are consequences to such crimes, crimes that frankly are beyond description. Take care and all the best.